Okay, so today we're going to look at building this, the Meshcore repeater. I featured this in my last video, and there was a couple of people that wanted to know the full details about how to build this from scratch. So that's what this video is going to entail. There we go, inside I've got all of my bits and pieces in there. So we're going to put this together today. Now I've also got all of my tools all set up here. If you have a look, I've got all of the parts that are required in front. Now all of these are listed in the description below, so if you want to pick them up and you want to follow along, then you can do so. You can also modify depending on what you want to do. So for instance, I'm using 18650 batteries in my particular build. You might want to use maybe a different battery pack. I do like the 18650s. You've also got the choice of a couple of antennas here as well. Now, before I start, I did sweep these two antennas. I know some people asked about that previously as well. This one here, this is the 5.5 dBi antenna. This is 880 to 955 megahertz. And then you've got the smaller one, the 915 megahertz. This is the 3 dBi version. Now, I did a sweep, the shorter 3 dBi version. It says that its frequency is 915, and it's pretty much spot on. It's actually a very nice match. Checked here on the Nano VNA. And then the other one, which is the 5.5, that was a little bit flatter across the whole band because it goes from 880 to 955. But, you know, it wasn't too bad either. So you could use either or. So the first thing I've got here is my box. So I'm just going to take my bits and pieces out here. Let's just make some more room while we shove everything over to one side. So you've got this plastic bit in here. We can sort of take this out whilst we are doing some drilling into the box, which was what we're going to do first. So you just take these two screws out here, and this little plastic bit comes out. This is handy for sort of mounting to. You could drill through this with 3mm or 3.5mm drill bit, so you can secure it to that. So now that we've got the box all bare, there's nothing in here, what we need to do is we need to start off by drilling some holes. The first hole is going to be here for the end connector. So this is a N to SMA. So the top of the box is up here. I'm just going to drill in a hole in there for that. And then we'll have two further holes at the bottom. And the two further holes at the bottom, one is for a gland, IP67 gland here. This is for the cable for the solar panel to come into. And then we're also going to drill a hole here for the little breather bung as well in the bottom. What I like to do is I like to just measure across here, and that's about 85. So what we're going to do is we're going to mark half of 85, which is about 42.5. So 42 will be close enough. So we'll just go in here, 42. It's roughly about the middle there. And then I'm just going to butt that up there against the plastic and have a look here. That's about 45. So half of 45. So we're going to go 22.5, about there. So that, our dot here, this is where we're going to drill the end connector out. So to start off with, I'm just going to use a little 3.5mm pilot hole just in the top, just so that we've got a spot to drill into. Once we've drilled the pilot hole, we need to use a step drill. So here's a step drill just to step it up to the size. Now the diameter of this is around about 15 millimeters or so. So we need to drill up to around about that. Now that's nearly there, but not quite. So what I can do is I can either continue with the drill, or I can just use my little deburring tool to just take a little bit more plastic out so it fits quite snug. Right, now that that hole has been drilled, we need to do the bottom two holes here. So I'm going to do a similar thing, except I'm going to measure the center of where this is now. So what I'll do is I'll get my ruler And I'll just measure again across the bottom here. What was that, 22.5. So we'll go 22.5. I'm just going to do this roughly. So I'm going to go in, that's 25 in there and 25 in there. So now I've got 25 in from the centers, which we're going to have to move this down. This is all very, very crude, but essentially it doesn't really matter as long as we drill the holes in reasonably nice straight line. If I had a square, I could also square that off, but I don't really care, to be quite honest. So what I'm going to do is same thing, going to drill a pilot hole for these two. So the cable gland's going to need to use the step drill as well, but that's fine. I'm going to go and put in that for that, but for the small little bungs, for the little breathers, they're probably only about 4 or 5 mil, so I can just use the little drill bit for that. So 6mm hole for the little breather to plug into, so that's quite nice. And then this one I just stepped it up. I think it's, what is it on the step drill? 12mm, and then just gave it a little clean out. So put both of those in, and then what we want to do is just do up the bung, do up the gland. We can do it hand tight, we can tighten that later on. And then just do the same for the little breather as well. End connector into the top. So take off the top nut, top washer. So we've got the gland there on the bottom. Oh, a little bit of a tight fit, there we go. Put those all back together and we'll tighten this up. Okay, the next hole that we need to drill is we need to drill the hole for the solar panel to install here on the front. Now there are two options with this. You can either use the bracket that comes with the solar panel, which you can mount here onto the back of the panel, and then what you can do is you can use that to adjust the angle of the panel. Now in the previous video I said I don't really know about the longevity of this and whether this is, you know, a good thing or not. Again, you could do this if you want to, and you can use this to mount to the front of the box. But what I'm going to do is, and I've already done the modification on my other unit, I'm just going to put a bolt straight through there to just mount that panel straight to the front of the lid of the box, and then that way it's just a lot closer, it looks a lot nicer. So I'm just going to do that. I'm not going to use that, but you can if you want to. So to just measure where this is, we're just going to have a look here at roughly where the center of, or where it sort of sits central on the box here. It's not really all that critical. You can mount it wherever you want. It's just one of those things. If you really want to get, you know, critical with your measurement, you can obviously do that as well. This is sort of the line that we're sitting in there, I think, something like that. So then all I need to do is now measure halfway along to find the middle of that. 85, so what are we going to do? 42.5, something like that. 41, 42, 42.5. So what we're going to do is we're going to drill a hole right there, and we can use a 1/4 inch or I think a 6mm bolt will fit into that as well. Straight through the box. I've already got a drill bit that is the right size. Just make sure the bolt goes through, which it does. Now the bolts that I've got are not, they're a little bit too long, because when you screw into the back of the panel here, see how much thread there is left. So if you got shorter bolts, that would be better. But all I'm going to use here is I'm just going to use a couple of nuts here. You could also stack a whole pile of washers if you want to, but I'm just going to use a couple of nuts to just sort of stack it up a little bit so that we only get a smaller amount of thread popping through. And then what we can do is just check to make sure that it all fits correctly. I just did it hand tight there. We're just going to undo that now and set it to one side, because we are going to do some other modifications. Now the next thing that we want to do is we just want to lay out roughly where we want to put everything here in our box. So what we're going to do is just put the little plastic grate thing that these boxes come with back into the enclosure. Where's the other screw gone? Don't you love that? You're working here on the workbench and you lose everything. Oh, I did forget to mention too that you can use these. This is a N connector to UFL connector here as well, rather than using the SMA adapter here on the top. So then you can just put that straight in and then this goes straight into the board. That's probably a better option. The only reason I'm not showing this is because I don't have any of these left. This one is actually broken here at the UFL connector end, so I can't use that, but it is an option. So I've got plenty of the SMA ones. So you can use either or. Right, so I've actually lost the other screw here on the workbench somewhere. I don't know where it's gone. If you have a little parts bin, you can put things in there so that you don't lose them. So that's there now so that I don't lose stuff. Okay, now that you've got that back in, let's just do a bit of a rough fit out of what we're going to look like. So I'm just going to put the 18650 battery holder somewhere in there roughly. I'm going to use these CN, I think, what are these? CN 3791 MPPT adjustable solar controller. So these come with a couple of leads which we need to cut and modify. So we're going to put those into the parts bin so we don't lose them. And this has got solar in here on the top. It's got on the bottom battery. So the way that we wire this is we have the battery on one side and then we have the load on the other side. Now the load's going to obviously be our little Seed Studio board over here, and then we've got solar in over onto the bottom, and that's all that we really need to do with this board. Now these boards that I've got here are the 6-volt ones. What I'm going to do is just sort of place that down, gonna sort of sit that down in there. Now you can also do a little bit of a fit out for where you want the Seed Studio board that I'm using. This is the XRF NRF 52840. This has got the little WEO board on the bottom here as well. Comes with this little antenna. We can take that off, we don't need that. Now once you've got your parts all laid out and you know where you sort of want to mount things, what you need to do is we need to go and modify this little Seed Studio board. So the first thing that we need to do is just have a look at the orientation. Here, the UFL connector on the bottom board faces opposite the USB-C. So this is at the back, the USB-C is at the front. And the reason being is because we need to take this off and we need to put that aside. And then on the bottom here, you'll see that there's two little pads. There's a battery plus pad and a battery minus pad. So what we need to do is come in and chop one of these wires that go to our MPPT controller, and then we need to wire it up to our bottom of our board. So the bottom of the board here will accept 4.2 volts, which is about full charge of our 18650 battery. So we're going to cut that, solder on the wire on there, and we'll use a little bit of hot melt glue just to hold this wire in place as a bit of strain relief. Now you will notice too with these cables that the orientation swaps. So what we need to do is when we go and plug it into the board, we need to make sure that the orientation is correct as well. So we can do that later on, but for now, let's just go and measure the length here that we've got, about halfway. We'll cut that in the middle, we'll put one off to one side, and then we'll just strip our wires down. Now these are very small pads, so you will want a smaller soldering iron. Unfortunately, I don't have a smaller soldering iron here, but with a bit of care we can still make it work. So let's just tin these wires first. Now yeah, so on the bottom here we've just got the little pads. So plus is the pad to the right hand side, minus is the pad to the left hand side if you're looking at the Seed Studio logo there. So what I like to do is just put a little blob of solder on each pad, make sure that the soldering iron is nice and clean. Now, you might want to use something to hold this board as well if it moves around a little bit for you. Now, you want to make sure that you don't bridge them as well because they are fairly close together. So what we'll do is solder on the wires, and then once we've soldered on, we'll just double check to make sure that they haven't been short it out in any way. Now, sometimes this can be a little bit difficult, so I just like to bend the wires at a right angle just to get them in at the proper angle. If we get our solar controller, let's just have a look at the orientation here. So it's going to go into one of these battery ones. So the positive terminal here is on the right hand side and the negative is on the other side. So if we went and plug this in, you'll see that the orientation is around the wrong way. So the negative side is supposed to be here on the left, positive is supposed to be on the right. That's fine. So what we can do is we can unplug that, which once they're plugged in, can sometimes be a little bit difficult to pull them out again. What we need to do is we just need to flick up these little tabs here so that we can swap the wires around. And whilst we do that, it means that we can also test the orientation, make sure that it's not short-circuited as well. By the way, this knife is not really that sharp. It's actually a blunt blade. Right, those two are out. So what we want to do is go and grab our multimeter. Make sure we don't get a short between these two, which we don't, which is good. Now whilst we wait for the hot melt glue gun to fire up, we'll just put this connector back into the correct orientation for how we want it into the battery terminal here. So at the top, without plugging it in, we know that we need the red here onto this right side. So we want to just flip that over. And you'll see that there is a little tab. It'll be very hard to see here on the camera, but there is a little tab there. We want to just make sure that tab's there, plug that in, that should then grip. And then same two on the other side. And now, when we plug this in, we have the correct orientation with positive to the right and negative to the left. Now if we take the one that we just cut, if we plug that in, we'll see that that is around the right way orientation. So this is now going to go off to our battery, so we can then solder that in. And we're going to do the same here for the bottom for the solar. So if we go and plug in the solar, we just want to make sure that we have the correct orientation. So if we plug it in that way around, it's incorrect. If we plug it in the other way around, that end, that's correct. So what we can do is now we can measure sort of half the length of that. Now that we've plugged it in the right way, cut that in half, and then the spare one we'll just throw over there because we don't need it for the minute. So we've got now our solar, we'll go here in the bottom, there's going off to our board, and then we've obviously got here our battery connection as well. So now that we've got some hot melt glue happening, we just want to go in here and put a little dab of hot melt glue onto the wires to the bottom of the board, not too much, just enough so that it provides a little bit of strain relief for the wires so that they don't go walkabout anywhere. Right, once that's dry, then what we could do is plug in the bottom of the board. Now remember that the UFL connector that we've got here, the UFL connector goes to the opposite end of the USB-C, so we're going to plug it in that way there, like that. Now what we can do is we can wire this up to our battery and also to our solar. Some of the battery holders, depending on what you'll have, will already have these connectors installed on here, but again, if you have a look, the orientation is around the wrong way. So if you want to, you can either wire this into whatever battery pack that you have, or you can change around the adapters in here. Either way works fine. So what I'll do is just get a bit of double-sided tape. Here I've got a couple of strips will do. Got our double-sided tape on there, and we also want some double-sided tape here on the bottom of the solar reg. One strip should sort us out. Hopefully that's not too long. No, perfect length. And then we'll just stick these two down. I just like having the wires to the top there, so I'm just going to stick that down and push it up hard against the side here. And then once we're in there, we can just stick that down. Oh, look, I found the other screw sitting under something else. So we can put that into the bottom of the box now. I knew that it was sharp somewhere. And then the bottom of the MPPT charge controller. Just peel back. And then I'm going to just put this down here beside it, down here, the bottom side. In my previous build, and I would recommend that you do this, in my previous build, between the battery and the solar regulator, I put a fuse in the positive line. Now, I don't have any small fuse holders or anything like that, but what you can do is you can get something like a little M205 fuse. I've got a few here that are 2 amp hours, or 2 amps, sorry. Solder to the terminals directly and then put some heat shrink over it. So it's a bit of a bodgy way of doing it if you do have a fuse holder. Now the reason why I recommend you do this is you've got 2 18650 batteries in here. If you've got 2 in parallel, the ones that I've got are 3000 milliamp hours. You've got over 6000 milliamp hours. You've got 6 amps of battery sitting there. Now if you get anything that shorts on this side, then you're going to probably cause a few sparks that are going to happen. So I always like to put a fuse in the line here, because if you do and you draw any more than 2 amps, this wire here probably could handle maybe 2 amps, I reckon. If there's any more than that, it's going to pop. So it just gives you a little bit of insurance against that happening. And then what we do is just on the edge of the fuse here, we can just put a little bit of solder on each end. Obviously do one end like that and let it cool down. Don't go and grab it from the other end straight away. So what we can do is we can then go and we can solder that directly onto one side. And then I've got a little bit of clear heat shrink here, which I'm just going to cut to a little bit longer than that fuse. And then what we can do is, if the fuse does go, we'll be able to see it. It's obviously going to be a bit of a pain to replace because you're going to have to undo that all again. That's why you can use a fuse holder, but I don't have a fuse holder here at the moment, so this is what we've got. Now the thing is, we shouldn't be drawing any more than 2 amps through this, because the little seed board only uses about 100 milliamps, and even charging through the solar is not going to get anywhere near up to 2 amps, not with our little 2 or 3 watt panel here. So I don't think that's going to be too much of a problem. So we can go and heat shrink this now that it's all in there connected. Now I'll say this again, I said this in the previous video, these particular battery holders, just check the orientation of them. You'll see that they are paralleled here on one side where the red wire goes in, and the black wire comes down here to the bottom as well. They are both parallel at each end. So make sure that the battery orientation is positive here to the top where the red wire is, and negative to the bottom. Ignore anything that is printed here on the batteries as far as putting them in series. That's completely wrong. If you do that, you're going to get a dead short. Now, I'm just going to go in here and I'm just going to stick that, I think, up here on the side again. I was going to stick it down here, but the problem is because of these pins at the bottom, there isn't really anything to sort of stick it to easily. You could probably hot melt glue it in here, potentially, but that's a little bit messy and I don't think that that's going to look very good. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a little sort of strip, and again, this is all personal preference depending on how you want to mount this. You could mount it any way that you want to. This is just one orientation that I've got in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on this side here. Now, one thing that I will do is I'll leave enough room for the USB-C to be accessed, because if we ever need to reflash this device or program it for the first time, which we do because we haven't done that yet, we want to make sure that we do that. So I'm just going to stick it there. Just need to wire up our solar panel. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in now. This has got heaps of lead on it, which we don't need. I'm just going to chop maybe, there's probably about 30 or 40 centimeters there. We don't need the rest. Throw that out. Now what we're going to do is just do a test again here at the front. We're just going to do a test mount, put our bolts through and just do that up so that we know roughly how long we need the lead. So here we go, we've got the lid open, and we'll just feed this cable through the gland. And we'll leave a little bit of slack. If we actually close the lid, you can see that there's a little bit of slack there at the bottom, looped up, which is good. So the good thing about having that as well, that little loop, is we've got a place for the water, if the water does hit here, to drip off, a drip point. So that's going to be perfect. Strip this wire back. And to make it easier, if you want to as well, you can do up the gland as well, just to stop the wire from moving inside the gland. We'll just strip this wire back till we get our positive and negative there. And then all we need to do is we just need to wire this up, positive to positive, negative to negative. Now I just need a couple of smaller bits of heat shrink, which will go over the positive and negative of those wires. Always remember to put your heat shrink on before you go soldering anything. Now we've got our solar all wired up, the last thing we need to do is connect in our antenna into our board. Now you can put in a 915 megahertz bandpass filter here in the line if you want to as well. You might want to sort of reshift this around if you want to place that in line so that the battery holder's not in the way. That allows you to be able to, if you're having issues with maybe interference, or if you're on a busy site that you deploy one of these to, or you've got some sort of noise issue, then one of these might help as well. But I've got a little right angle SMA to UFL connector. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here and plug this into the top of the end plug. The other thing too is when I bought these, I bought 30 centimeter ones. You probably don't need or want 30 centimeter ones. You could probably get away with sort of 10 centimeters. It's a little bit more easier to do this before you go sticking it. So we're just going to undo this tape. So rather than sticking it to there first, we just need to take off this bottom board and stick on our UFL connector to our SMA, because it is a lot easier to do it like this when it is unplugged and off, there we go, than it is when it's all stuck on to the side of the box. Just do a little bit of a test to make sure no wires get sort of crimped when we go and shut the case as well. So the next step that I would do with this is probably a little bit of waterproofing here on the top of the end connector. Might put a little bit of silicone just around the bottom here so that no water can leak in. Put the antenna onto the top, and then I'll just use a bit of electrical tape first, and then a bit of self-amalgamating tape here just to protect all of this so that no water gets into the top of the antenna. The bottom of the box shouldn't really get any water in there, and we can also too, if we want to, put a bit of silicone around the hole here, just in the top side of the box. Remove this plastic off the front of the box and put a bit of silicone around here so that when we press this up against the top of the box, we end up not getting any water in either. They come, these boxes, with these plastic inserts that you put in with screws into holes in the back of the box. So you see here on the one that we've just built, here on the back, there's holes that you can put in. Now I found a U-bolt that fit quite nicely between those two. Ideally it would be good if I had two. I've got the other U-bolt over there spare, which I'm going to put on this second unit. But yeah, if you can find a U-bolt, it's 58 millimeters. It's written on the back here, 58 millimeters center to center. So yeah, that might be just one way that you can mount it. The other way that you could probably mount it is maybe with a couple of cable ties or something else, or some screws. I've also seen others use magnets as well for deploying these. So that's just one mounting option anyway that I've used. So that's the little Meshcore build. Let me know in the comments if this was helpful. If you want to see other Meshcore videos, then I've got a playlist of them over here, as well as LoRa APRS. All of this sort of stuff, this LoRa stuff, is really interesting to me lately, and I've been doing APRS for hams. There's quite a big difference from regular APRS to LoRa APRS. So check it over here in this video.